are once again following the minute-by-minute twists and turns of Pete Hegseth's pursuit of becoming Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense. That is, despite a growing pile of allegations against him, from allegations of sexual misconduct and alcohol abuse, as well as alleged financial mismanagement, to say nothing of Hegseth's extremist views about things like the medieval crusades and what the New York Times describes as Hegseth's, quote, praise for the brutal religious military campaigns of the past, which, according to the Times, Hegseth sees as, quote, a model for today. So it was notable when, after days of remaining conspicuously silent on the fate of Hegseth's nomination, today Donald Trump weighed in on how, quote, Pete Hegseth is doing very well, and how, quote, Pete is a winner in all caps. But what Donald Trump is doing outside of posting on social media is a very different story. Washington Post reports this, quote, Hegseth has been told not to expect Donald Trump to apply pressure to Republican senators to get him over the finish line for confirmation next month. That is according to two people familiar with the discussions who spoke anonymously, meaning Donald Trump appears to be unwilling to spend any of his own political capital to save Hegseth, preferring what looks like a Hunger Games, may the odds be ever in your favor approach, a sink or swim gambit that could prove politically risky, given that after 4 straight days of a wannabe charm offensive on Capitol Hill, Hegseth still doesn't have the votes to be confirmed. The Hill crunched those numbers. Hegseth can only afford 3 Republican defections, but, quote, a Senate Republican aide told The Hill that as many as 8 Republican senators are prepared to vote against Hegseth, most of them not willing to call publicly for Hegseth to resign because they don't want to be criticized by Trump's MAGA allies. One Republican senator put it a little more bluntly, telling The Hill this, quote, I think most people do not expect Hegseth to make it. There's 7 or 8 Republican votes against him. It's a matter of time. Hegseth's nomination is on death watch, end quote. And the hurdles Hegseth still has to clear are formidable. Arguably one of the most influential Senate Republicans in terms of Hegseth's nomination, Senator Joni Ernst, who yesterday told Fox that she is not yet a yes, has no plans to meet with Hegseth again today. Next week, Hegseth is expected to sit down with Republican Senator Susan Collins, who has stated that the charges of impropriety against Hegseth are exactly why cabinet picks ought to be subjected to FBI background checks. In other words, anything could happen. Buckle up. It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Senior political reporter for The Washington Post and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter, Aaron Blake, is here. Also joining us, political strategist and MSNBC senior analyst Matt Dowd is back. And with me here at the table for the hour, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation, right here on MSNBC, the Reverend Al Sharpton's here. Aaron Blake, take me through the fate of the Hegseth nomination and tell me what, if anything, is working in his favor at this point, because it feels like a whole lot of headwind and not much headway.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see right now, although I would say that, you know, Joni Ernst is setting herself up to be a pretty decisive figure in all this. You know, she said some very skeptical things about him. You know, if you look at her comments and you read between the lines, you could understand that as suggesting to Donald Trump that maybe it's time to go for somebody else. You know, she's talking openly about the idea that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis would maybe be a better pick for this office. But also you have a situation in which she's setting herself up, if she did come around to Pete Hegseth somehow, where she could potentially pull other Republican senators along with her. Now, whether that would be sufficient, is anybody's guess. I think a lot of these senators are truly waiting for whatever might come out of something like an FBI background check to see if this is somebody they can ultimately support. They don't want to commit too early because they don't know what's going to come. And so I think everybody's just kind of taking a wait and see approach right now. But a lot of people clearly would prefer that this was a lot easier than trying to confirm somebody like Pete Hegseth.
I mean, what's interesting about the appetite now for a background check is that the background check isn't meant to replace a confirmation process. It's their job to ask questions. The background check is simply to make sure that the nominee isn't a target for potential blackmail. I mean, the oath that you take after you're sworn in is to the United States of America. What exactly is Susan Collins looking for in the FBI background check, Aaron Blake?
Well, I mean, you could look at this as them making sure that there aren't other allegations that have been made against him in the past, like the alleged sexual assault that we saw in 2017. You could look at this as them seeing if there is more to these reports about his alleged abuse of alcohol, his treatment of women. Basically, this is them trying to get the fuller picture of everything in his past. And you're right, from that point on, it is up to them to ask questions about these things and go beyond that report. But I think that provides kind of the basis point for them to really have those conversations. And that's the point at which they'll decide whether they want to actually entertain this in a situation in which it actually gets to these confirmation hearings, which I think is a really big question right now.
Aaron Blake, I want to read a little bit from your reporting on this. If Hegseth's pick is withdrawn, it would mark a second high-profile loss for Trump after his Attorney General pick, former Congressman Matt Gaetz, lasted just 8 days. That would be highly unusual. The emerging question is what that says about Trump's political capital, with still a month and a half until he's actually sworn in. Newly elected presidents have seen their cabinet picks fail, but generally not for two marquee posts, and generally not this quickly. Perhaps the play here is to shoot for the moon and see what he can get, and then fall back on more confirmable picks if need be. But Trump also has his political capital to mind at a crucial juncture. That means there was and is a premium on bringing his party to heel. A sufficient number of Senate Republicans are demonstrating that they can stand up to Trump and apparently don't fear the consequences too much. And you could forgive them for feeling emboldened to do it more going forward. Tell me if your own analysis is that this is a factor of senators who for 9 years have been anything but courageous and willing to stand up to Trump, and they suddenly are different, or if it's that these picks are so manifestly unsuited for the jobs they've been tapped to fill.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of those two things. There's no question that Donald Trump, after he was elected, on election night, he was talking about the idea that he had a historic and powerful mandate. Well, we know now that he didn't even win a majority of the popular vote. Republicans won the House by a relatively small margin. They won the Senate largely because they won in red states. So this was not a huge affirmation of the Republican Party necessarily, but that doesn't mean that that's not the message that Donald Trump took away from this, that he doesn't believe he got this huge mandate. And so he went with a number of picks that the people around him had to know were going to challenge these Republican senators, even in ways that they weren't necessarily challenged in his first term. And so if you're a Republican senator and you're looking at that, there is definitely some pain to be experienced if you are going to stand up to Donald Trump, at least theoretically. But also they need to be asking themselves what the tone being set is. If they sign off on these picks that they are clearly uncomfortable with early on before he's actually, inaugurated as president, is that going to just lead to him doing all kinds of things that are going to make them uncomfortable moving forward? And whatever you think about these Republican senators, a lot of them have, concerns about who might be running the Defense Department. They have, concerns about who might be Attorney General. These are big jobs that have really big impacts. And so these are things that matter to them. And so if there are things on which they could stand up to Trump and maybe take some political risks, I think these are some of those things. And we're seeing that to some degree.